ask questions and get answers from Carrie Ann or from me or David or about your right to strike and how a strike would go?
Yes, absolutely you have a right to strike. I'm going to give you more information about why that is true. So I'm going to move through a PowerPoint presentation. Nato's going to move my slides. I'm going to speak a little bit more slowly than I normally would because we are simultaneously translating this presentation, okay? My name is Carrie Ann Steele, and I have been an attorney representing your union for over 16 years. Yes, it's been a pleasure of a lifetime, I swear. You all are always pushing the envelope, trying out new things, testing new strategies, always standing up for your rights. And it means that your legal team, which includes me, has to always be right there with you, thinking about how to expand the laws so that they are even more protective in the future than they were in the past. Let me tell you a little bit about that. When I came on the scene as a lawyer in 2008 or so, I was immediately involved in a strike by public employees in the educational setting. That was higher education. It was at the University of California. Back then, very few public employees were striking, unfortunately. And what it meant is that no one was really testing the right to strike in the public sector. And so there was this state agency, it's a very important agency for you all. It's called the Public Employment Relations Board, PERB, okay? It entertained a request by the employer, the University of California, to block all of the thousands of employees from going on strike. These were employees who were in janitorial positions, other kinds of support positions, and they were living in poverty, and said, we deserve more from our employer, this educational institution. Yet that educational institution convinced PERB back then in 2008 to block every one of them from striking by going to court. Well, the union back then in 2008 came to our law office and said, what do we do? What do we do? We were just told by a judge we're not allowed to strike. And we said, that's wrong. The judge made a mistake. That's wrong. You should still strike. And they did. In 2008, they went on strike for 5 days. They were out there on the picket line, and it was beautiful. How many of you have ever, at a different workplace maybe, been on a picket line? Do you agree it's beautiful? Yes. All right, it's a really good experience. So it was 5 days of that, and sure enough, that employer was forced by those workers to improve their wages, lift them out of poverty, and make their health benefits and many other things better for them. And so back then, when I was a brand new attorney, that's what I witnessed, and I thought, oh my gosh, this tool of striking is so powerful. And it seems like the laws are not really where they need to be, that you all, as employees, are demanding more, exercising your rights, and the law needs to catch up. And then I began to work very, very closely with your union, and you all would tell me, we're going to go on strike. In fact, we're going to go on strike tomorrow, and I would be there supporting you. And what it meant is that each time you struck, we were able to pursue legal claims, like file legal cases that would expand your right to strike even more, because you were always trying out new things. So some of the most important decisions in the state of California regarding the right to strike involve SEIU Local 10-1 members. Many of those cases are actually involving strikes here in San Francisco, okay? And David Canham shared with you, your union has been on 31 strikes in the last 10 years. That is not an exaggeration, that is absolutely true. And indeed, each time, Your fellow members won very impressive victories. And what he did not mention, but I think it's really important too, is how many times your fellow members have threatened to go on strike, called a strike, scheduled a strike, and then didn't end up having to go on a strike because simply calling the strike was enough pressure on the employer to get a very good contract. The employer freaked out about the strike and finally came to its senses and said, oh my gosh, we need to take this bargaining very seriously. We need to listen to what the workers are demanding. And then the employer made a change in its bargaining position, and then you got a good deal. I would say countless times that has happened. Is David here to say, David, how many times do you think in the last 10 years this union has threatened to strike and it wasn't necessary? Two times in this chapter, right? Okay, that's some good math. 3 or 5 times more than the 31 strikes. So do the quick math on that. That's a lot of times. And then in this chapter, twice. 2 strike threats, and then you're not needing to go on strike ultimately. So let me talk about the importance of that. To make a strike threat can sometimes be even more powerful than the strike itself, so long as the threat to strike is believable, credible, okay? The employer needs to be convinced that you are going to strike. You all need to be convinced that you are going to strike. Everyone organizing the logistics for the strike needs to be convinced that you are going to strike. And it may be that you don't even, until maybe 2 a.m. right before the strike, find out, you know what, it's not necessary to go on strike because the employer finally agreed to a good contract, okay? So what is it that would make a strike believable to the employer, to the point that you could actually win what you need even without striking, okay? One of the things that's so important is showing up to a strike school. Yay! You're doing a great job! Yes, thank you for being here, because the employer will know that a strike school is happening today. It won't know exactly who's here, but it will know that there's a good turnout. People are interested in striking. They're wanting to learn more about their right to strike. Wow, this is a move toward going on strike. And then another thing is participating in the strike vote, okay? Now that is a number that the union often announces. It will tell the employer that whatever percentage it is of people who participated in the vote, voted in, I assume, you're going to support the strike, we'll see, voted in favor of the strike. And we announce that because it's good for the employer to realize that there's strong support for a strike. And then there's so many other things you can do too, like participate in rallies, go to the board of trustees, wear these beautiful purple shirts I see so many of you in, and your other SEIU logos in the workplace, and so forth, right? There's so many things you can do to build up to going on strike that will make the employer realize you're serious, okay? So now, back to my original answer of yes, you have a right to strike, okay? I'll tell you the laws that relate to this. So this presentation is called The Fundamental Right to Strike because it is my opinion, perhaps you agree too, that the ability of a worker to withhold their labor, okay, not work, go on strike, is one of the most important rights you have as a worker, okay? You can choose to go to work and work, but if you are protesting your employer, you can choose not to work in solidarity with one another, okay? So please move to the next slide. So I toolkit, but some of you might like thinking about strategies or tactics in terms of military speak. So you might think of it as, say, a weapon in your arsenal, okay? Now the employer has its own tool or weapon in the bargaining process. Right now, the tool or weapon it's using is to do absolutely nothing and just make no improvements in your wages, benefits, and other working conditions. But it could be the reverse. It could be that at the end of the bargaining process, if you do not reach an agreement, it could impose what it wants to impose, even if we say no, even if we object. Okay? Now, what is our our tool or weapon at the end of the bargaining process if things do not go the way we want it to go? Go on strike, right? So the employer has its tool or weapon, we have ours, okay? And please go to the next slide. That is an important part of the bargaining process because your school district knows you have the right, okay? And so they're aware of it. It's a pressure on them. It's a stress for them. And that pressure or stress on them might actually help them get pushed to the point of reaching an agreement with you. Does the employer ever give us something good just out of the kindness of their hearts? No, absolutely not, right? It's because you demand it, you insist on it, and then they're forced to give it to you, right? So this is nothing to be ashamed of if you strike. It's actually something to be very proud of. It's something that has been supported by even the highest court in the country. It's part of the bargaining process to maybe need to go on strike. Okay, please turn to the next slide. All right, you have a right to strike under what's called a collective bargaining law. It's the law that gave you the right to unionize. It's the law that protects your right to wear these beautiful purple shirts in the workplace and so forth. It's the law that gives you the right to go on strike as well, okay? It's the Educational Employment Relations Act, okay? So PERB, remember that agency I mentioned? Well, back in 2008, that agency that oversees disputes between the school district and the union and things having to do with your rights to bargain and come together to organize, okay? PERB, back in 2008, used to be terrible. They didn't know what they were doing. They did not support workers, okay? They were all appointed by a more conservative governor at the time. But the PERB agency of today is very, very supportive of unions and workers. Very supportive, okay? Most of the people in the highest positions in that agency used to work for, used to lead, used to represent as attorneys labor unions, okay? And they really understand public employees, including public school district employees. It's a really good time to be a public employee in California, in my opinion. It's a really good time to go on strike in California. I mean, this is why you see it happening all the time, right? It seems like every day you're reading an exciting story about another union, another group of workers going on strike. And often they are public employees. Next slide, please. All right, so the only exception to the right to strike is really, really narrow. It's that someone would not be allowed to strike if their absence from work, meaning if they don't show up at work on the day of the strike, if that would create a clear or imminent threat to public health or safety. And I'm familiar enough with all of your classifications. I've analyzed them, and I do not think that any of you would fall into that category, okay? That category I just described is called the essential employee category, and that's different than the essential employees such as yourselves who would go to work during the pandemic, working in person. Okay, that's not what we're talking about. So I don't think there's any limitation on the right of any of you to strike, because if you're on strike, there's going to be no threat to public health or safety. No need for me to speak on this more because none of you should be concerned about it, so let's move on. So timing of a strike. So The way the union does it, and we're doing it this way now, is there's often lots of actions leading up to a strike. There's a strike school, there's a strike authorization vote, okay? And then usually you would schedule a strike, you would announce it maybe, okay? And then you would potentially go on strike. There are legal things to consider in terms of timing of a strike. If you had a labor contract that was in effect today, your labor contract that says your working conditions in writing, it was agreed to between the district and the union, right? If that were in effect today, then maybe there would be a restriction on your ability to strike. Because in that labor contract it says, during the life of the labor contract, during the time it's in effect, you cannot strike, okay? But what is the status of your labor contract? Expired! Yeah, thumbs down, expired. It has been, right? So there's nothing to consider in the contract. Next slide. Expired! Exclamation point. Yeah, thank you. It's as though we coordinated this. All right. And next slide, please. Okay, there's another timing factor. I bet you've heard a lot that when a school district like your employer and a union are in a bargaining struggle, as you are right now, that there's supposed to be this long process where they can't agree on things. They're supposed to do mediation or fact-finding, all these very legalistic kinds of processes, and it takes a long time. You might hear some teachers mentioning something like that, okay? Do not worry about that, okay? This strike that your union, if you all authorize it, that you all intend to call, would be an unfair labor practice strike. ULP strike. I'll explain what that is. Okay? So an unfair labor practice is something that the employer does. They commit an unfair labor practice. It's a violation of law. It's a violation of that law I mentioned before, the EERA. Okay? And if you are striking because you're protesting against those violations of the law, then you can strike whenever you want. You don't need to wait months and months and weeks to do all these legal things like mediation or fact-finding, okay? You can strike whenever you are ready and you decide to schedule your strike. Okay, so that's tons of flexibility that you have regarding the right to strike. Okay, so you need to be striking in protest of the unfair labor practices of the school district. Okay, but that doesn't need to be your only motivation. You might want to strike for a lot of reasons, including some that you mentioned before, which is it's been 4 years since we've had a raise. We're paying $6.25 per gallon for gas today. It's only going to go upward from there. Rents are sky high. You could be striking for all those reasons also. Okay, there could be many reasons why you're wanting to strike. In our communications about the strike, we make it very clear. This is an unfair labor practice strike. Okay, so I don't know if you met earlier today Jenny, and with her, Chelsea, they're representatives of your communications team in the union. Your communications team is very savvy. They know exactly how to talk about your strike. They will talk about the fact that it's a ULP strike. Okay? Next slide, please. So, a reminder in summary, a ULP strike is one that is motivated at least somewhat by your desire to protest the employer's unfair labor practices, okay? So our notice would say, we're going on a ULP strike. Do you see the signs there that say SEIU? Your picket signs that you'll make, a number of them will say ULP strike. That's not the only thing your signs will have to say. You can get very creative. Right? I know you can. I know you can say some really cool things on signs. I know you can talk about a lot that you're feeling toward your employer on your signs, right? Just every so often, we should have a ULP picket sign in your crowd. Okay? And then if any of you is asked by Chelsea or Jenny to talk to somebody from the media about the strike, you'd want to be really clear that you're talking about the strike as a ULP strike, okay? So for some of you who might be asked to do that, so keep that in mind, okay? ULP strike. Next slide, please. Okay, so I've said ULP at least 20 times already. What does it mean, okay? It's a kind of violation of the law that can be put into two buckets, two categories. Okay? Violations of the law relating to the field and relating to the table. Let me explain that. So if an employer commits a ULP in the field, by that I mean in your work sites, okay? So we already have filed a ULP against your employer. Okay, so my office prepared the legal filing. It's a kind of charge that we filed with her, alleging that the district has retaliated against some of you who are out in the work site trying to talk about the strike. Okay, the employer, the managers especially, they freak out. They say things they should not say. They're violating the law. They're trying to scare people. Okay, that's the kind of ULP you sometimes see that happens out in the field, out in the work sites. Okay, so note that we have at least one ULP on file about that. Second one, ULPs that happen at the table. At the table, okay? Those are ones that usually have to do with bargaining issues. Well, what about the fact that when you all tried to start bargaining with the employer after its management team just totally quit, disappeared, got ousted, they did not get back to you for 3 months. Your bargaining team was ready to go, ready to bargain, did not hear anything from your employer for 3 months. That is 3 more months that you have had to wait and wait and wait for an improved wage, improved working conditions. No response from your employer at all for 3 months. Okay? That is a violation of the law. It's called bad faith bargaining. The district bargained in bad faith, okay? So we have an unfair practice charge based on that. Okay, so we have that legal filing already filed with her based on that. Your bargaining team has asked the district some questions that will help your bargaining team best represent you in bargaining, because it needs data, it needs information to be able to best represent you, and the district has not responded to that. That's another form, another type of bad faith bargaining that the employer has engaged in. There's a legal filing that our office filed at your request on file with PERP about that. I don't want to bore you with the details of this because your employer has violated the law so many times, and we have so many legal filings on file. I could be standing up here all morning or afternoon listing them off to you. Just know there are a lot, okay? So, those are the kinds of things that are ULPs. Next slide, please. Okay. So surface bargaining, that's where people are coming to the table claiming that they're there, authorized on behalf of management, but they're not even really trying to bargain with you. They're just wasting your bargaining team's time and so forth. The failure to meet at reasonable times and places, that's the fourth check mark there. The district did that when it made you wait for 3 months before it even responded to you to set bargaining dates. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so why do we file ULP claims? Why have you all asked our office to file those on your behalf? Well, it gives us more flexibility in when we can call the strike. You want to be able to schedule your strike when you're ready. Okay, you don't want to be waiting for some legal process like mediation or fact-finding that doesn't really help you at all. Right? So we want it to be a ULP strike, so we file these ULPs. But also, the public is more sympathetic sometimes regarding your strike, your reasons for striking, if you are talking about how the school district is violating the law. The school district is a governmental entity. It's supposed to be educating students and teaching everyone to be a good public citizen, right? And here the school district is violating the law, violating workers' rights, right? The public is often very sympathetic about that. Okay, so we like to talk about that with the public. Please turn to the next slide. All right, so I mentioned that you might want to give prior notice of your strike to the district. You might want to send a letter to the district that says exactly when you plan to start striking. So such a letter usually says the start date, how long you're going to go on strike, the end date, okay? You do not have to give that kind of letter to the district to tell them when you're striking. There's one PERB decision from many, many years ago that says in a school district setting, so such as your workplace, that you should give at least 60 hours, 60 hours prior notice of a strike. And the idea is so that parents can arrange for childcare. Because many of you work with kids who cannot be left alone at home, okay? So that's 60 hours. Okay, so we can consider that, giving at least 60 hours advance notice of a strike. But sometimes you actually want to give the employer even more of a heads up of your strike date, not because you have to, because the law says anything about that, but because you want the employer to have that much more time to be scared, that much more time to realize, oh my gosh, I need to schedule more bargaining dates with the SEIU bargaining team. We've got to get this deal done. The employer sometimes needs that time, especially your employer that has such a hard time getting anything together and organized and moving in the right direction. I'm sorry to be so negative, but I'm sure many of you would say even far more negative things about your employer than that, right? You might want to give them enough heads up that they can actually get themselves together to try to get you a good deal. Okay? Next slide, please. All right. So I could say again and again, you have a right to strike. It is such a protected right. You do not need to be worried about striking, okay? Yes, it is a day, or maybe you'll go on strike for more than one day, where you would not receive any wages. You would receive no income, okay? No wages from the district for the days of the strike. Okay, and I understand that's a very serious sacrifice, right? A sacrifice that thousands of your fellow members have already decided in their strikes was worth it to them, okay? Thousands of public employees throughout the state have decided it is worth it to them to go without wages to be able to strike because they're fighting for something better that has a long-term benefit, okay? And because sometimes there are benefits of striking that are not all about money. Sometimes the benefit of striking is you can change the power structure. Change the power structure of the employer. Your fellow members over at Alameda Health System, by the way, went on strike during the pandemic, and they are healthcare workers, okay, so that was a big deal. They went on strike over there in a way that, yes, got them a good contract, and every single person on the board of trustees got fired because they were incompetent and anti-worker, and they were replaced with people, many of whom were union specific advocates, okay? Like the union had a voice in who was going to be, yes, on the board of trustees representing workers. Yeah, your fellow members were amazing over there. In fact, maybe it would be worthwhile for some of those leaders to come talk to you about that. More compelling coming from them than coming from me. All right, so you have a protected right to strike, okay? And there are still some things that you cannot do, okay? For example, we did not engage in violence on the picket line. Okay. So, I mean, you can exchange words with people who are choosing to cross the picket line, okay? You can express your disappointment to anybody who's crossing the picket line for sure. And you could actually try to get them to join you on the picket line. If you see one of your coworkers about to cross, you could say, wait, hold on. You belong here with us. Do not cross that picket line, okay? But we don't engage in violence, okay? Another thing is we do not block people from going in and out of the district offices or parking lots, okay? Again, it's totally fine for you to engage those people. You can, ask the parents to roll down their window so you can talk to them and while they're in the driver's seat of their car and tell them about why you're on strike and how you need their support and that sort of thing, okay? But you can't totally shut it down so that people cannot get in and out. It's a safety thing. People need to get in and out of buildings and parking lots, okay? Next, we do not do a sick out. Who's ever heard of that phrase, sick out? Okay? You know how you have sick leave, the employer provides you paid sick leave. You're supposed to use it when you're sick, yourself sick, or if your family members are sick, okay? You're not supposed to use it to basically go on strike against the employer, okay? If you're calling in sick and you're not sick, then you could get in trouble, right? That's being dishonest. So if you're going to participate in the strike, and I would hope every single one of you does, do not call in, okay? You don't need to tell anyone that you're not going to work during a strike. Do not call in and pretend, you have a cold, okay? Proudly, you're striking. You don't have to call anybody. You don't have to say where you are or that you're not coming in, okay? So do not call in sick. All right, last one. Sorry, Nato, please advance the slide. Now, some managers might be really scared about the strike and wonder, we're gonna do Q&A at the very end. Can you hold your question?
There's a lot of side conversations here that it's hard to hear what you're saying. So I don't know if people can respect a little bit because I hear a lot of noise on this side.
Oh, okay. Thank you, I'm gonna repeat that back. So the acoustics in here are a little bit hard and there's some side conversations that are happening so people who are wanting to listen cannot hear. Can you stop your conversation, please, so that we can get through this presentation? Thank you. All right. So managers might be really scared, trying to figure out who's going to work during a strike so they can count on programs still being able to go forward without disruption, that sort of thing. So some managers might try to go up to you and say, are you going to work during a strike? Or worse, can I count on you to work during a strike? That sort of thing. They are not allowed to do that. It is not their business. They should not be asking you. The only time and place they would ever be allowed to ask you that is if you worked in, say, a hospital. Okay, that doesn't apply to you. Even if you work in a medical office within the school, like you work in some sort of healthcare clinic or something within the school, even that, okay, they're not allowed to be asking you if you're going to come to work. Okay, so if a manager does go up to you and ask you if you're going to come to work during a strike, please let your chapter leader know or your field representative know, because we would probably want to file another ULP claim against the employer, because that scares people for their manager to go up to them and ask them that, right? It's none of their business. If you are asked that by your manager, just say, hopefully you say, I'm going on strike, and you say it proudly, right? Or you could say, you're not allowed to ask me that. Next slide, please. All right, and then after the strike, you come back to work in your position. You don't lose any seniority. You don't lose any status. You don't lose your schedule. You come right back to work, okay, just as before, all right? And your job is protected. Nothing bad is supposed to happen to you, nothing, okay? So, any of you who are probationary employees, you might be wondering, wait, she's saying all this stuff, I have a right to strike, but does she understand I'm a probationary employee? Do probationary employees have a right to strike? Yes, okay? Yes, you have a protected right to strike too. So you cannot be released from probation because you went on strike, okay? So when you come back from the strike, it's just like anybody else, okay? You have a right to return to work and nothing bad can happen to you. Okay, that's true of temporary employees too. We're gonna have a question to answer at the very end. We're almost done. Turn to the last slide. All right, and some of you might be wondering, well, what about your health benefits? Your family counts on you to have health benefits, including vision, including dental. So what does that mean if you go on strike? Well, your union was involved in passing a law in the California legislature in Sacramento, and the law says that the employer has no right to change or cut off your benefits at all. Not your health benefits, not your vision, not your dental, if there's any sort of life insurance offering, not even that. Okay, they're not allowed to cut it off, they're not allowed to change it at all. They're not even allowed to threaten to cut it off or change it. If the employer does that, that is a ULP. Okay, so PERB would find that they violated the law. Okay, so that's great. Next slide. All right, so many of you might be wondering, well, what about the teachers? Can they support us? Even if they don't call a strike, can they support us? And if so, how can they support us? Okay, or you might be wondering about the building trades union too. Okay, my answer applies to both of them. Okay, so you know that the UESF contracts are also expired, true? Okay, they're in a similar situation as you are. Their contract expired on June 30th. Okay, so that means there's nothing in their contract that tells them that they can't go on strike with you. Okay, yeah, that's big. That's big. Okay? Very, very big. And so that's good news, right? And even if UESF does not officially call a strike with you, every single UESF member, as an individual, is allowed to honor your picket line. Okay, the law says that if they walk up to their workplace and they see a picket line in front of their workplace, that they have a protected right to say, oh, I'm not crossing that, and they can do one of two things. They can join your picket line, that would be beautiful, or they can just turn back and go home. They do not have to go to work if going to work would require them to cross your picket line. That's huge. That's huge, okay? So think about that power that you have, that the district does not know, right, how many of these other district employees are going to stand in solidarity with you. They need to prepare for the worst case scenario as far as they're concerned, which is that you all stand together and nobody works. Okay, so that's great. That's another reason why it is such a protected right to strike in California. Because PERB, in many decisions, has said again and again that workers standing together, even if they're from different unions, workers standing together, that showing of solidarity is protected under the law. Okay? Next slide. And then you come right back after work. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we're to the Q&A. I'm going to need help facilitating questions because I'm not good at keeping a queue of people.